Hello everyone, I am Demented Kirby and welcome to my channel, the Commander Tavern. Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews and other deck techs. On this episode of the Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on Arahbo Roar of the World with Kaheera the Orphan Guard as his companion. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel. Other ways you can help support the channel is with my Patreon. Patrons get early access to scheduled videos on YouTube, and higher tier patrons get access to the VIP section of my Discord server as well. You can find a link to that down in the description too. In fact, patrons got a chance to see this video earlier. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Arahbo is a 3/3 cat avatar for 3 generic, 1 green, and 1 white. Its Eminence is an ability that triggers at the beginning of your combat phase where you can give another target cat you control +3/+3 until end of turn. This is brutal in this particular deck since it's cat tribal, playing a lot of incredibly cheap cats that can get pumped and deal a ton of damage since the beginning of the game. Although Arahbo is rarely cast in this deck since Eminence works from the command zone, if you control Arahbo, whenever another cat you control attacks, you can pay 3 to give it trample and +X/+X, where X is its power. This is even more important in the deck since most of the 1-drops and 2-drops have a bigger power than toughness. To further support this strategy, Kaheera is included as the companion. Kaheera is a 3/2 cat beast with vigilance for 1 generic and 2 green-white hybrid mana. It gives all of the other cats we control +1/+1 and vigilance, which is nothing to scoff at. Unfortunately, with the recent update to the companion mechanic, you can no longer cast Kaheera from outside the game as originally intended. You have to first pay 3 to put it into your hand. Although this severely nerfed almost all companions, even some to the point of being no longer viable, at least Kaheera becomes an Anthem effect that self-tutors for 3 generic. Fortunately, Kaheera is merely a bonus in this deck and the deck isn't dependent on Kaheera, but the severe nerfing of companions and how it affects Commander is a topic for another day. As I just mentioned, the deck aims to be as fast as possible, to be as aggressive as possible, and take out opponents quickly. This is why the deck is running 1-drops with 2 power or 1-drops that can pump themselves. Jungle Lion, Pouncing Jaguar, Savannah Lions are those 1-drops with the power of 2. Dropping this on turn 1 means giving 5 damage potentially on turn 2 before anyone has any blockers. The Jaguar has Echo, but that's negligible since it's just 1 mana. Loam Lion and Walnacatl are 1/1s, but they can get bigger simply in the presence of a forest or plains, which is not a problem in the deck, especially with all of the double-typed lands in the deck, so these can also be turn 2 5-power attackers. Scythe Leopard and Steppe Lynx have the potential of dealing even more damage thanks to their landfall ability. If you play a fetch land the turn they attack, they get +2/+2 and then +3/+3 with Arahbo, meaning that Steppe Lynx has the potential of dealing 7 damage on turn 2. In fact, I've given 9 damage on turn 2 with the Lynx thanks to casting a ramp spell after dropping a fetch land to get the second land to cast that ramp spell. So these can really put the pressure on opponents early on. Similarly, the deck's running 2-drops with 3 power to further advance our early game aggression. Blade of the Sixth Pride, Oresco Swiftclaw, Prowling Caracal, and Savai Sabertooth are vanilla 3/1s for 2 mana. These can easily be 6/4s on turn 3 thanks to Arahbo, which is nothing to scoff at. It might reach a point where opponents will have to block them and trade for a huge creature of their own, or lose any hate bears, mana dorks, or utility creatures. Initiate's Companion is another 3/1 for 2 mana, but this one can untap any land or creature when it deals combat damage. This is crazy good here since we can untap a land to keep casting things in our post-combat main phase, or just keep available to cast responses. Bronzehide Lion and Fleecemane Lion are 3/3s for 2 mana, making them way better than the vanilla ones. Not only that, but they have abilities too. Bronzehide Lion becomes an aura when it dies, granting indestructible to the creature it's attached to if you pay green-white. Fleecemane Lion can become monstrous mid to late game, making it bigger and indestructible with hexproof. Adorned Pouncer and Lost Leonin are the final 2-drop beaters in the deck. Adorned Pouncer has double strike, so it has the potential of dealing 8 damage on turn 3 or taking out a creature and then surviving combat. Lost Leonin is perhaps the most dangerous one of all. If cast early game and manages to hit an opponent twice, then they lost the game to infect damage. The deck aims to deal a lot of damage quickly, but we won't take out the entire table before our opponents start building up defenses, so we have to make our creatures even bigger as time passes. Kaheera isn't the only boon in the deck either. The deck is running Primal Rage to give our creatures trample, and True Conviction to give them double strike and lifelink. Giving our creatures trample early on in the game makes them very difficult to block, and even if they are, most of the damage will trample through. True Conviction might seem difficult to cast as 6 mana, but this is more of a mid to late game spell anyways. This is one of the finishers of the deck. Triumph of the Hordes is another finisher. With enough creatures on the board, we have the potential of taking out the entire table with Infect thanks to this spell. With our creatures having trample, flying, or the other boons given, casting this is usually game over. but with Nylea gives Death Touch to all of our attackers, which makes blocking them even more of a predicament for opponents. If our creatures have Trample too, they just have to give 1 damage to blockers and then give the remaining damage to the defending player. Not only that, but its activated ability is modal, and every choice we have is an excellent one, especially for 2 mana and tapping. King of the Pride is a static boon of +2/+1, which is incredibly oppressive here. If we follow Curve and drop a beater on turn 1, turn 2, and then cast this Cat Lord on turn 3, we can be dishing out a lot more damage. Mirror Entity and Jezal Goldmane need activating to use, but they also serve as mana sinks. With all the cheap spells in the deck, we don't need to overextend to get the job done. We can keep a strong enough board state to just use the mana to either pump our creatures or protect them from a board wipe. If the board is wiped, we can just rebuild it again quickly, but soon enough we'll see how we will deal with board wipes. Mirror Witherlight Duelist makes it harder to block our creatures since they can't be ganged up on. She also protects us from attacks if she's tapped. Keep in mind though that Mirror's defensive ability won't work if she has Vigilance because she won't tap down to attack, so it's important to remember that. With so many cheap attackers, Beastmaster Ascension gets online incredibly fast in this deck, especially if cast in the early game. Giving +5/+5 to all of our creatures is backbreaking and can be enough to give us the victory all on its own if it manages to survive even just a couple of turns. However, one of the most powerful boons in the deck is Eldrazi Monument. It gives all of our creatures +1/+1 flying and indestructible. The only downside is having to sacrifice a creature each upkeep. This drawback isn't as bad as it seems. The deck is able to create tokens which can be sacrificed each upkeep to the monument in order to keep it. Either way, we can just sacrifice our weakest creature in a pinch to avoid sacrificing the monument. Speaking of tokens, the deck creates cat tokens in order to further overwhelm opponents. With all the boons, these tokens are rarely weak 1/1s. Brimaz, King of Oreskos, and Leonin War Leader both create tokens when they attack, but Brimaz can also create tokens when blocking. The King's tokens have Vigilance while the War Leaders have Lifelink, which are both great keywords for combat. Thanks to Arahbo giving either of them +3/+3 when attacking, we can attack without worrying too much of them dying in combat so that we can get the tokens. The Cattle War Pride also creates tokens when it attacks, but unfortunately, they're exiled at the end of combat. That being said, this cat is amazing because it forces opponents to block each copy of itself with a single creature. This means that it paves the way for the rest of our attackers to get in unopposed. If we want to protect the original, just pump it with Arahbo to make it 6/6 and survive most blocks. Regal Caracal creates tokens when it enters the battlefield, while Prize Sovereign creates them when it's exerted. As a bonus, Regal Caracal is also a cat lord, giving +1/+1 to all other cats, while the lion becomes huge since it gets +1/+1 for each other cat you control. Giving it Vigilance means it can attack and then be exerted at the end of the turn before yours to create the cat tokens. Combined with the previously mentioned Initiate's Companion, you can use it to untap the lion after it's exerted in order to be able to do this each turn. As to how we're planning to protect our board state, the deck's running Heroic Intervention and Teferi's Protection to protect our entire board from a total wrath. Although it's best to be wary of not overextending yourself when piloting the deck, these spells help protect the board state you do have. Flawless Maneuver, Reborn Defenses, and Unbreakable Formation give Indestructible just to our creatures, but they're the bread and butter of the deck, so they need defending. Since Arahbo is rarely cast in the deck, Flawless Maneuver isn't always free. But when I have it in my hand, I usually cast Arahbo just to make it free, while also taking advantage of having Arahbo on the battlefield. Reborn Defenses also has the bonus of populating before giving our creatures Indestructible, so the copied creature token also gets Indestructible until end of turn. We can also protect our creatures by bouncing them with Temur Sabertooth, which also gains Indestructible when it does so. We can also use Temur Sabertooth for additional value by bouncing creatures to get more enter the battlefield triggers from them later on. So it pulls double duty in the deck. Prowling Serpapard helps by making our creature spells uncounterable, which is great for preventing Kaheera from getting countered before we even have a chance to use it. It's also a 4/3 for 3 mana, making it quite the beater as well. Spirit of the Hearth gives you hexproof, while Leonin Abunas gives hexproof to your artifacts. This is great at protecting you from targeted effects, but the Cat Spirit is also a 4/5 flyer, which makes it quite the beater as well. Protecting our artifacts from spot removal is important too, since we're running mana rocks for acceleration as well as monuments to reduce mana costs, but we'll see those soon enough. Besides protecting ourselves and our board state, the deck also includes ways to disrupt our opponents because one should avoid playing Battlecruiser Magic after all. Highcliffe Felidar and Kasali Slingers are synergistic removal pieces since they're also casts that can take advantage of the boons and be beaters as well. Destroying the 3 largest threats is nothing to scoff at, even if that's at the cost of 7 mana, since we still get a 5/5 cat piece with Vigilance. Kasali Slingers are basically a 3/5 Aura Shards on a body. It also has reach, which is a plus. Speaking of aura shards, the deck is running it as well. This pairs great with token creation since the tokens entering the battlefield also trigger it. Getting rid of artifacts and or enchantments is important since most pillow fort and sax pieces, which are the deck's natural weaknesses, are artifacts and enchantments. So we need to get rid of them without getting rid of our own artifacts and enchantments. Naturally, Beast Within and Generous Gift are also included in the deck to get rid of any irksome permanent. The controller might get a 3/3 for it, but a 3/3 won't do much against our cat army. However, the best removal card in the deck is Winds of Abandon. We exile each creature we don't control. Sure, their controllers get to ramp for basics for each creature exiled this way, but what's it going to matter if the board is clear to kill with combat damage? This is also amazing to overlord before casting Triumph of the Hordes to really secure that win. Naturally, we don't want to run out of steam, so the deck runs plenty of ways to dig through the library. Synergistically, Alms Collector is an excellent inclusion. Many decks cast that epic draw spell, and what better way to stop that from happening than to also draw a card from it. Then, once on the battlefield, if anyone would draw more than one card, they only draw one and so do you. Even though it's a cat, it's quite the hate bear. Keeper of Fables allows us to draw cards with the spirit of the deck. Unfortunately, we don't draw a card per non-human creature dealing combat damage. Still, being able to draw a card each combat is good enough. It's also a 4/5 cat, which is great for the deck. Shamanic Revelation takes advantage of our board state in order to draw an insane amount of cards. Trust me, this will more than fill your hand with steam. However, the best draw effects in the deck come from Vanquisher's Banner, Guardian Project, and the Great Hedge. Since every creature in the deck has the cat type, that's what we choose for the banner. So as a bonus, it also pumps them +1/+1. Unlike the banner though, Guardian Project and the Great Hedge trigger when the creature enters the battlefield, not when it's cast. However, unlike the banner, the Great Hedge pumps creatures since it puts a +1/+1 counter when that non-token creature enters the battlefield. It's also relatively easy to cast in this deck. Just cast it after the triggers have made a cat large enough to make it cost as close to only double green as possible. It also functions as a great mana rock, tapping for 2 green mana and gaining 2 life when it does. Speaking of rocks, the deck's running a couple of rocks to help accelerate the mana. The main creatures are relatively cheap, but accelerating the deck helps get out quicker the more expensive boons. It also helps to have mana open for our responses as well as a mana sink. So in addition to the Great Hedge, the deck is running Soul Wind, Arcane Signet, Celestia Signet, and Talisman of Unity. The deck isn't running any Moxes because they're not as easy to use since the deck runs so few lands, artifacts, and legendary creatures. Since the casting costs for most things are cheap, Mana Crypt isn't that helpful either. Farseek, Nature's Lore, and 3 Visits are obviously in the deck. This trifecta is great at getting double type lands onto the battlefield, especially with the 1-drops that have landfall. They help in potentially triggering landfall 3 times in a single turn. Hunting Cheetah and Oresca's Explorer don't ramp outright, but they do get lands into your hand. That being said, the Cheetah is the better of the two since it triggers on dealing combat damage. More often than not, it's going to get through with combat damage and potentially set you up with a forest each combat. Notice that it's not just a basic forest either, so you can get dual type lands as well. Growing Rites of Idlamok is useful in more ways than one. Besides potentially getting more creatures in our hand when it enters the battlefield, it also transforms fairly easily, becoming an improved Gaia's Cradle, which is also in the deck. These lands produce a ton of mana that can be sunk into pump effects to help secure the win even faster. If you don't have Gaia's Cradle or can't afford it, it's not necessary for the deck to function, but you can also try getting its gold-bordered version instead. Zendikar Resurgent helps in making our lands tap for more mana. It's quite costly at 7 mana, but it does draw us a card when we cast a creature. So for the late game when we're running out of steam in a more grindy game, it can definitely help us keep applying pressure to our opponents by helping us draw and sink mana into our pump effects. Druid's Repository is an amazing early game drop since it gets counters whenever we attack with a creature. We can then use those counters to cast things afterwards. If cast early enough and not dealt with, we can easily cast those more expensive spells like Zendikar Resurgent and True Conviction way earlier. The final pieces of the deck are Ketra's Monument and Ronus' Monument. Not only will these reduce the cost of our creatures, but they also trigger when we cast creatures. Ketra's Monument creates tokens which, although not cats, have vigilance so we can use them to attack as well as chump block, or better yet, as fodder for Eldrazi Monument. Ronus' Monument is even more oppressive since it gives a creature we control +2/+2 and trample, making a creature insanely large, especially when combined with Arahbo's ability. If we cast enough cheap creatures in a single turn, we can make quite the beater, potentially enough to take out an opponent from the game, especially if we're pumping Lost Leonin. The rest of the deck are just the lands. The deck's running all 8 fetch lands, Command Tower, Sun Petal Grove, Bountiful Promenade, Horizon Canopy, Brushland, City of Brass, Mana Confluence, Savannah, Temple Garden, Canopy Vista, and Scattered Groves, as well as 6 snow-covered forests and 7 snow-covered basic plains in case anyone's running anything that benefits us for it. Although the fetch lands are incredibly useful for thinning the deck of lands as well as maximizing landfall triggers, you do not need to run the more expensive ones for the deck to run well. Same with Savannah. If you don't already own these cards or they're outside of your price range, budget substitutes will do just fine. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Arahbo, Roar of the World, with Kaheera, the Orphan Guard, as its companion. Although companions were severely nerfed, the deck building restriction of a cat tribal deck isn't that difficult to do, which is why it's not such a sacrifice to have Kaheera as the companion. And even if Kaheera is dealt with, it's more of a boon than anything, so the deck isn't too dependent on it. That being said, having access to such a great and synergistic boon is definitely a plus. So at least in this case, the nerf is considerable, but doesn't make the deck dysfunctional like with a lot of other companion decks. But it is what it is. If you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link. That also helps out the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of The Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I'm Demented Kirby, and happy brewing.